Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Beat the Good. Jess, I'm starting all over again. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Beat the Big Guys. I'm your host, Sandy Rosenthal. And today, my guest is from the great city of New York, New York City. Hey, Danielle.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on.
I'm so thrilled about having you. I've read your book cover to cover. It was so enlightening. It has opened my eyes about so many things. My guest's full name is Danielle Friedman, and she just published a book. And actually, no, it's been out a full year. I think it just came out in paperback.
That's
I have
right.
that right? Okay, let's get physical. How women discovered exercise and reshaped the world. Highly recommend this book. But it also, I felt it was very important for the listeners out there who have their big guys to be in their own communities and neighborhoods. And I thought a lot of great information can be pulled from Danielle Friedman's story in her book. So, Danielle, I have to introduce you first. Danielle has a great introduction. So here we go. Danielle Friedman is an award-winning journalist and author of the critically acclaimed Cultural History of Women's Fitness, Let's Get Physical, How Women Discovered Exercise and Reshaped the World. Danielle's feature writing has appeared in the New York Times, Vogue, the Washington Post, Glamour, Health, and other publications. And she has appeared as a guest expert on dozens of NPR shows and podcasts, as well as on the Today Show's 24/7 channel. Today, all day. And she lives in New York City with her husband and two sons, and one of those is brand spanking new. It's just 7 months. Isn't that right? So, Danielle, you were frozen there. After I said, "Isn't that right?" there was just silence. So, isn't that right? You've got a 7-month-old.
A 7-week-old,
A
actually.
7-week-old. It's so
He's
hard for me
brand
to
new.
believe. My mind can't wrap itself around that you've got a 7-week-old and you made time to chat with me today.
Well, this is my favorite topic, so I'm delighted to be here.
And maybe good for both of us, for you and for me, for my show. In fact, I'm sure of that.
Hmm.
So Danielle, go ahead and take the mic and take it away and talk for a few minutes about your story and why you thought it was important to tell it.
I would be glad to. So this story actually began about, well, now it's probably almost 6 years ago, when I stumbled on the history of the bar workout, which is, for those who don't know, this ballet inspired this, and the bar was this really rich, complicated, fascinating story of the inventor Lottie Burke, who explicitly invented bar in the 1950s to help women connect with their bodies and develop some sort of physical autonomy. And as I was reporting that story and I was writing it for New York Magazine's The Cut, I I wanted to contextualize the history of this one particular workout. And so I thought, oh, I should speak with whoever wrote the book on the history of women's fitness. And I was really sort of shocked to discover that that book didn't exist. Um, and as I started thinking about what had been covered when it came to women's fitness history, it really struck me as most of what was out there was kind of kitsch. It was treated women's, fitness history was treated as these silly fads and just as trivial and unimportant. I became more um
Danielle,
that have
can
been
you back up? I'm sorry, it might be my internet. I'm not sure, but could you back up where you said it was trivial and unimportant and kitschy?
sure, sure.
Thank you.
You know what? I am getting a message that is saying my internet connection is unstable. I don't know. It looks fine on my end. But if we have to just keep pausing, just let me know. And
Okay.
I
Okay.
apologize for that. I could
No
also try.
worries.
I could switch to my hotspot too, and we could try that if that would be, if we
And
need to.
in fact, I think I'll do the same. Okay.
Okay.
And that should fix it. Because
All right, let me try that now.
yeah. I'm going to pause recording just a second, Zoom recording. Yeah, we are recording. Yeah.
So I was really shocked to discover that no one had written a comprehensive history of women's fitness history. And or I should say, of the story of women's sort of entrance into an evolution within the fitness industry. And when I did think about kind of the pop culture media coverage that was out there when it came to women's fitness history, it was mostly kitsch, and it was treated as kind of silly and trivial. If you think about like neon leotards and leg warmers and silly fads, and partly thanks to discovering the story of Lottie Burke, this very radical woman who invented barre in the 50s, I saw that there was a much bigger story here. And it was a story of women's sort of pursuit of self-determination, of physical strength. And it was a very feminist story. So in that moment, as I was still writing my initial story for The Cut, I became obsessed with telling this broader story. And I just a little bit of research opened my eyes to the fact that in every kind of behind every major exercise movement throughout the 20th century in particular, there was this Lottie Burke like figure behind it. And so I hope to really bring these women's stories to life, and along the way, basically reveal how far we'd come, and also the what women had been up against in every decade, which to getting to the point, getting to the focus of your show, I'll just add that the story that I tell in the book, the narrative is filled with big guys that take various forms, whether it's just sort of cultural patriarchal norms that through all sorts of kind of sneaky ways sent the message that women shouldn't be physically strong and should forever be submissive to men, to media, to a kind of capitalist machine that has for many years been selling women on the idea that basically been capitalizing and exploiting on women's insecurities. And so the central tension throughout the whole book was, and continues to be in the world today, how fitness, as it arose in the second half of the 20th century, the industry, how it was served as both a tool for liberation for women and a tool of oppression. And I was very interested in how going forward we can really harness the former and move away from the latter.
What you're saying is you've encapsulated the book so well. I'm so glad to have that, a recording of that. I almost said on tape. That would have shown my age. But that was beautiful. And that's exactly how I felt as I read it. You weren't screaming what you just said in your book. You were telling the story, but everything you just said comes through, if you're really paying attention and really reading it. So I thought the book was just fabulous. It also brought back lots of memories for me personally, which we'll get into in a moment. But I want to impress on our listeners that it wasn't that long ago that women were told exercise is bad for you. It is an ancient history. Okay, it's in my lifetime. When I was 11, everybody in the fourth grade was walked into the cafeteria, and we had to listen to watch a movie. And the movie was about menstruation. And we were told to avoid physical exercise during our period. And they gave an example of physical exercise. You ready for the example? Bowling. I mean, What about a
Wow.
marathon, the New York City Marathon? Okay. Bowling was, so I was told this, and
Hmm.
I'm not that old. I'll go ahead and tell you I'm 65. So this is in my lifetime. It's not
Mhm,
ancient history
mhm,
by any stretch.
mhm.
Um, but you're right. It was a constant conflict for these women. Even these pioneering women who were so sure of what they were doing, even they were conflicted. And I can't blame them because they're getting conflicting messages. So
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
talked about, am I saying her name right? Bonnie Pruden?
Prudent. Yeah.
Pruden. Okay.
Hmm.
So I just adore Ms. Pruden. I wasn't familiar with her until I read your books, and now I'm fascinated by her because she was so ahead of her time. But I'm so proud of
Hmm.
her that she quit her show when the sponsors were peddling diet pills.
That's right. Yeah. This was when I believe when she was on the fledgling Today Show. She was one of, I mean, there's
Mhm,
so much I could say to kind of introduce Bonnie Pruden, but just to the specific story that you mentioned,
mhm,
she was one of the country's first um she was sort of one of the first to basically demonstrate exercise for the whole family on TV.
mhm,
She went on to have her own TV show. She was a contemporary of Jack LaLanne for those who were fans of his show,
mhm,
which outlasted hers by a few decades. But Bonnie learned that her segment, which is a regular segment on the Today Show, in the late 1950s when it was being sponsored by a diet pill, her viewers were assuming that she endorsed that diet pill, and
mhm.
she very much didn't. I mean, um, she really believed in the value of strength for strength's sake, and had a very for her time had a pretty um, sort of equitable view of both men's and women's potential there.
way ahead way ahead of a time. But this is the book for those
Yes.
of you that are watching this on video. And at the end of the book, I really love this. You talk about where you talk about where these characters are today, and
Hmm.
what they're doing today. Is Ms. Puddin still with us?
She is not,
Oh,
unfortunately.
I
She died in 2011.
I would have loved to meet her. She's my
So would
hero though.
I.
She's a posthumous hero for me.
Yes.
So the I also understand that you ran the New York City Marathon with your 68-year-old dad.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It runs right actually the where I'm sitting right now, it runs right by my apartment on First Avenue. And after years and years of watching the runners pass by and cheering them on, I was thrilled to be out there with my dad, has been my biggest running cheerleader and motivator forever. And I always have to say he was 68, but if anything, I think he was slowing down for me. So he is a
Wow,
major
that's
he's an
impressive. Yeah,
inspiration for me. Yeah.
that's wonderful for you. I'm so happy for you to have that kind of relationship. And you talked
Thank
about
you.
that it was so much history. I learned so much. For example, I learned about these fabrics that I really never thought about. These
Mm,
fabrics that are so important to be able to move.
mm-hmm,
And so
mm-hmm,
I got a whole history lesson on lycra and how
mm-hmm.
lycra was it used to be used. It was originally developed for women's girdles. Now,
That's right.
my mother wasn't the girdle generation, but my grandmother was. I remember her girdle and the hooks and the hooks and
Mm,
snaps, and she wore that
mm-hmm,
girdle
mm-hmm.
until the day she died in her 90s. But it was also it ended up being used for to make leotards and exercise wear. So what was originally a fabric for controlling women was actually eventually became a fabric to liberate women.
Yes, I this is one of my favorite stories in the book. Um, yeah, it was the DuPont Chemical Company spent years and years trying to create a fabric, or really a fiber, to be used in a fabric that would make a more comfortable girdle, because girdles were hellish to wear. And they finally invented Lycra. And for a while, it was a huge success. And then I believe it was 1961, I think it was early 1960s when Lycra girdles debuted. And then in a relatively short time, sales started plummeting. And DuPont was trying to figure out what was going on, and it was the birth of the women's movement as younger women were ditching their girdles, even more than bras, which was sort of more myth than reality. But women, especially young women, were refusing to wear them, and so then there was
DuPont assumed that the young women, teenagers, would do it what their mothers did.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. Right. And so there was this huge paradigm shift happening. And of course the focus was on liberation and what is a symbol of sort of restriction more than a girdle. And so then there were these warehouses full of unused lycra fabric, and some very industrious dancewear initially makers learned about this fabric, and they were meanwhile trying to invent a more supportive leotard. And long story short, the rest is in the book, but the lycra leotard was born. And for women who grew up either wearing girdles or just or wearing clothing that was meant to cover and restrict, slipping into this, sleek, supportive lycra wear as an adult was just felt amazing. It felt freeing. There's I think, as I mentioned in the book, whether it's leotards or yoga pants or sort of Lululemon pants today, there's a lot of you could debate forever sort of whether something like the leotard or tight fitting clothing is feminist or is sexualizing women, but at least at that moment in time, the women who were slipping into these leotards, so many found it to be very freeing.
That is such an interesting point, and it could be the subject of a whole nother book, because men have different requirements. Women have to wear these tight uniforms in gymnastics, which and you get if you get caught adjusting your uniform, you lose a point or a fraction of a point, whereas men don't have any sort of restrictions like that. So yeah, that's a subject of another book, and we could have a whole nother episode on just that.
Yes.
But you raise a very, very good point. So by the way, I was an aerobic dance instructor for 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
What type of aerobics?
It changed in 20 years. So when I first started, it was the now contraindicated high impact aerobics, and women were getting hurt, and we were doing things that blows my mind now, the things we were doing in 1990. And over time, that I switched to low impact aerobics, and then there was the slide, and then eventually and then there was the step aerobics. And you name it, I've done it. And I did it for 20 years. And just one quick point I want to make. I quit eventually to devote my time full time to being an activist and a civic mobilizer. And then I took up yoga. But you might find it interesting, Danielle, that in the early 1990s, the majority of my time as an instructor in preparing for my classes was spent on the music. Music.
Yeah.
That was back in the day when we used to take LPs and record it onto cassette tapes, because they didn't have something you have today where you could an entire 90 minutes of music seamlessly blended from one song to another. The majority of my time and other fitness instructors at that time was spent on the music, which is just interesting. It's interesting. It was neither here nor there. We had no choice. You had to have music for these aerobics classes. But I just thought you'd find that an interesting aside, and it also helped me get a lot out of the book. But all of you will get a lot out of this book. You don't have to be a past fitness instructor to really enjoy this book. Now, there's one last thing I really want to talk about, and that is the mixed messages and the confusion that we have. And it's still going on today, but it's certainly going on back when Jane Fonda started her workout tape that she did. And she pretty much, was very inventive, always trying different things. And I'm sure, I don't think there are many people who don't remember the Jane Fonda workout. So, and I devoted at least one full chapter on Jane Fonda, and I think she was well worth it. But it was interesting that she herself gave mixed messages. On the one hand, she would say, "You don't have to worry about how you look; that doesn't matter." Meanwhile, she herself is impossibly tall, impossibly thin, impossibly muscular, and beautiful. Okay. And then if you look at her tape, as you point out in your book, all of the other models, all of the other women in her tape were the same. They were all fit, slim models. And meanwhile, they're telling you, you don't have to worry about how you look. So what kind of message does that send? But to her credit, to Jane Fonda's credit, and I don't blame her for this, because she was getting mixed messages at the time. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. Oh, very much. I mean, yes, go ahead.
And I'm just going to say this one thing that I noticed on page 235. Jane Fonda said, "We are not meant to be perfect." Brings tears to my eyes. We are meant to be whole. Whole.
Yeah.
So beautiful. So this, I don't know when she said this. You don't have a date on this, but we are not meant to be perfect. We are meant to be whole. And that's just beautiful.
Yeah.
And I do see that in my eyes, I see that women and fitness is getting ever closer to what Jane Fonda believes. I would hope so, since she said it. So what would you say to this?
Oh, I have how much time do you have?
Okay, it's a big one.
No, it's I admire Jane Fonda for so many reasons, and I can tell you that I believe that quote came from her 2005 memoir, My Life So Far. And so one of the many things I admire about Jane Fonda is how, as you know, at least as far as we can tell, how candid she has been throughout the years of her own I guess sort of blind spots, and how willing she has been to talk about, some of her mistakes, the learning curve that she's experienced. And in the book, in telling the story of how she got into the fitness industry, how she ignited this global women's fitness movement, I thought it was important to kind of peel back the curtain on what had influenced her, what she was going through as a human being during that period of her life, and how it was reflected in sort of what she was selling. And Jane, from what she has said and written, and I should say, while I was fortunate to interview pretty much every other living pioneer that I write about. In the Jane chapter, I spoke with many people around her, the woman who invented the workout with her inner circle. But my understanding of Jane comes mostly from her own writing. But she had struggled with an eating disorder, with multiple eating disorders for many years. She felt, she talks about how her desire to be perfect was very much fueled by what she felt was a lack of love and affection from her father, going back to her earliest years. And she was struggling. But what she did know was that in discovering exercise, she felt more connected to her own body, a strength that she hadn't felt before, and felt like she was doing something that was for her own benefit as opposed to
Her health.
purely serving, trying to please others, and her health. I think, she was of her time. I think it was extremely unusual. So 1981 is when her best-selling book published, her first workout book, and 82 is when the video came out. It was very unusual to see what we're just starting to see today, which it's still unusual today, but the kind of body diversity that reflects what women actually look like in any, in form of media. And so yeah, we were sort of, she distilled the positive aspects of her relationship with fitness in a really powerful way that got so many women around the world moving and sweating and feeling okay about sweating. But it would take several more decades really for her to kind of fully, well, I don't even know if I could say fully, but move further away from the aesthetic aims of moving and closer to it just being a practice for overall well-being.
It is I understand why you said how much time do we have. It's a big subject.
Yeah.
And even I mean, it deserved an entire book and many more books. But I think we're doing a great job of encapsulating this for our listeners. And I want to, I love at the end how you talked about where we're going, and I was thrilled to hear about this Instagram, this woman on Instagram who is Black, queer, size challenged, and she has her own following. She has hundreds of thousands of followers, and she practices yoga. And she did it. She just put it out there, and it just happened organically. And I think it's wonderful. I'm glad to. I'm now following Jessamine, following her now.
Jessamine Stanley.
Jessamine.
And I just have to say, I don't think she sees herself as size challenged. I think she just lives in a larger body. And so she has been able to really build a community around, sort of just exemplifying the fact that fitness isn't just for small people. Fitness, a fit body doesn't necessarily, or doesn't mean a thin body, which is something that we have been conditioned to believe for over many decades. So yeah, Jessamine is amazing.
I'm following her now. I love her, and I as I mentioned, I practice yoga, so I'm just thrilled to have this. To even know about. I don't think she'll ever know about me, but I'm definitely following her. But also exercise. You touch on this on page 37, on page 237, and also several times in your book, you touch on how exercise remains prohibitively expensive for way too many people. Men and women, but women especially.
Yes. There is we have a major issue with accessibility when it comes to access, when it comes to opportunities to move in this country. And there's so many, there's many different components to it. Partly fitness has been sold as this aspirational good, this aspirational state of being. It has been targeted primarily to the white middle and upper classes for decades. And we've been, with the aspirational aspect, we've been sold on this idea that to take part in fitness, you have to spend a lot of money. You have to buy a membership. You have to buy certain clothing, when actually
the clothes. It's all about the clothes.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. And the other aspect of this, I guess to finish that thought, I was going to say, when, really it's about, as there's a movement now toward movement, and just recognizing the value of just going for a walk. You don't have to, it doesn't have to become a whole lifestyle. But the other thing I wanted to say was that, for so many complicated reasons, we have linked a person's fitness level with their with all sorts of positive traits. So if someone is fit, we tend to see them as hardworking and disciplined, and there's even, you know, an element of virtue that we place on fit bodies. And so the flip side of that is that people who don't present as conventionally fit um, are sometimes perceived as being lazy or not having willpower. When there is so much more to this picture, which is what I try to, you know, reveal, at least scratch the surface of in the book. Um, Having the time, having the means, having the safe space to move, to make time, you know, to make movement a regular part of your life is so very much a privilege.
Yeah,
It's not a right in this country.
not
Yeah,
everyone can run out their front door and jog in their neighborhood.
exactly.
And
So
even if they
yeah,
can, they might not, there might be only certain times a day that you can. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
So
it's
you
thankfully
raise
there is, yeah, it's starting to be seen as a social justice issue, as it should be. So we're at the beginning, hopefully, of a shift there.
you explain that so well, and I think this would be a great way. The final thing I'm going to mention that I'm so excited about, that I learned from reading your book, is about this organization founded by Lindo Bacon. It's called Health at Every Size Movement, that she founded. I am so
Mm-hmm.
excited about that.
Mm-hmm.
I just a personal experience. I'm actually genetically very thin. Turns out there's actually a gene for it that runs in my family. My
Mm-hmm.
mother
Mm-hmm.
had it. I have it. My daughter has it, and it's genetic. But on the other hand, all those years when I was a fitness instructor, it would never fail that one of my students would come up to me and say, "I've lost weight. Have you noticed?" And I was
Mm.
always embarrassed. I'd never noticed because I never paid any attention to weight. But because I think, one, because I was thin and because I was a fitness instructor, it was just assumed that
Mm.
I would be paying attention to things like this. And you just beautifully pointed out why it's not a good thing. Why we need to get as far away from it as possible. So bottom line, I'm really happy about this movement on health at every size. I'm thrilled about it.
Yeah, yeah. And we are seeing there are a number of shifts, I think, that are taking place simultaneously right now, slowly but surely. One is, as I mentioned, sort of evidence and science-based movements around the idea that fitness doesn't look a certain way. You can be perfectly healthy at a wide range of sizes and weights and shapes. Um, and also something I'm particularly interested in, and I've written about, is just learning to view movement as a mental health tool, as a source of joy, as everything but a way to make yourself smaller or fit a, you know, societal ideal of beauty. um and that it's a very exciting field that's really emerging around movement for mental health and for overall well-being.
I can see
And I
it.
hope that, yeah, um my hope is that that just flourishes over the next few decades.
Here, here. Here, and thank you
Mm.
for noticing this dearth of information about women and women's fitness. Thank you for writing your book, which is fabulous. It fun read. It's really fun. I hope you don't mind your book being called fun.
Oh, I love it. Thank
Good,
you.
good, and I highly recommend it. Danielle, is there any final words you have for our listeners today?
I really appreciate you having me on again. And I guess, you know, sometimes I'm asked kind of what's my big takeaway from the research that I've done. And just on a it sounds simple, but something I've come back to again and again is that women kind of can't go wrong. None of us can go wrong if we focus on moving in ways that truly feel good, that make us, that energize us, make us feel good, not just, you know, not necessarily while we're doing it. Good doesn't necessarily, it doesn't have to mean easy, but in a kind of holistic way, and hone in on that and what is actually, you know, benefiting us in the end.
Thank you so much. That was fabulous advice for us. And it goes very much with what Jane Fonda said, who is now a hero of mine. If she wasn't already before, she is now. And you're a hero too, Danielle. You're my hero as well.
Oh.
It's wonderful
Thank
to
you
meet
so
you.
much. Likewise, that makes my day.
So thank you, Danielle. And thank you, the listeners, for joining me today. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and rate this podcast on all of your favorite platforms. And remember, no matter who you are, you too can beat the big guys. Okay, stay with me. I'm just going to stop recording.